This latest business with Ukraine, where it appears that he is willing to take taxpayer dollars and dangle them in front of a foreign country in order to help himself and his own political chances of being reelected. It's wrong, it's a violation of the law, and Congress has a duty to perform. That's impeachment.
That was, of course, presidential candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren moments ago talking to the press after hosting a town hall in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Phone calls, cover-ups, and alleged election meddling. The biggest controversy of the Trump presidency is taking over Washington as Democratic lawmakers push ahead on subpoenas and hearings in their impeachment inquiry. That brings us to our weekly segment, Cross-Exam, with CNN legal analyst and former federal and state prosecutor Honig. And he's here, of course, to answer your questions about legal news. And, of course, we're doing it Saturday. Normally do it Sundays for those viewers who aren't used to it at home. This is where we get the viewer questions. They send them in, and then we give them the answers here live. So The first question from our viewer, does impeachment have to be based on a statutory crime?
Well, here we go. This is happening. This story is blowing up. Our inbox is blowing up from viewers. So thank you. Keep them coming. No, this is very important. Impeachment does not have to be based on a statutory crime. The House certainly can impeach based on a crime, but they also can impeach on anything they find to be an abuse of power. Now, we have this phrase from the Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors. And I think it causes a lot of confusion because on its face, it certainly sounds like, well, that has to be a crime. Mm-hmm. But if you do a little historical digging, that phrase was pulled from 1700s British parliamentary procedure. And the way it was used there was to include crimes, but also misuse of office or abuse of power. If you look at our own historical precedent, Andrew Johnson was impeached based on abuse of power. No crime. He was then acquitted in the Senate. Richard Nixon never actually impeached, but a draft article of impeachment for abuse of power. Bill Clinton had a draft article of impeachment against him as well for abuse of power. That was actually voted down by the House. But the historical precedent is there. So it's really important that our viewers keep this in mind going forward. When they hear this refrain of no crime, you do not need one.
So no crime doesn't necessarily mean no impeachment vote.
Right.
Another viewer wants to know, do you see any federal crimes in Trump's actions toward the Ukrainian president regarding the Bidens?
So you do not need a crime, but if you have a crime, you certainly have a better basis to proceed. So I do see several potential crimes here based on the call between the president and the president of Ukraine. First of all, bribery, right? Is there an exchange? That's sort of what it boils down to. The promise can be direct or indirect. And the key line here, I think the line that may live through history is, I want you to do us a favor. The idea here is the exchange is foreign aid in exchange for dirt on the Bidens. Now, is that enough? There's some fair debate about that, but I've seen real-life bribery cases based on less clear exchanges than that. Then you have extortion. Extortion is sort of the flip side of the same coin as bribery. Bribery is, if you give me this benefit, I'll do this thing to help you. Extortion is, if you don't give me this benefit, I'll do this thing to hurt you. So I think they're pretty closely aligned. And then you have foreign election aid. It is a crime to solicit foreign election assistance from a foreign national. Doesn't even matter if there's an exchange. So I think that's the easiest shot here if someone needs to prove a crime. So again, you do not need to prove a crime, but if you have one, I think you have an extra strong case for impeachment.
This week's revelations have raised more questions about other calls the president may have had with foreign leaders. One viewer asks, will the House review only the Ukrainian affair, or can they look at other acts during its impeachment investigation?
So the House certainly has a lot of menu items to choose from here. They have the Ukraine scandal. Let's not forget Robert Mueller. We have emoluments, meaning the president's use of office to personally enrich himself, and potentially obstruction of Congress. My advice to the House would be, let's be strategically selective. When I was a prosecutor, people used to say, go for the jugular, not for every capillary, right? Make your strongest case, get it out there, get it in, get it out. So I think certainly Ukraine is going to be front and center. There's an interesting decision about, do we just abandon Robert Mueller's findings? I think if the House is going to stick with Mueller, stick with the one or two most important, easily digestible things. Ultimately, Anna, I think now that House Democrats are sort of charging down this road, it's going to be really tough to turn back. Ultimately, it's going to be, I think it's very likely that the House does end up voting to impeach. The big question is going to be, what does the Senate then do when it comes up to them, whether they're going to vote to convict and remove?
Very quickly, your three questions for the week.
First of all, is any legislation going to move while this is all pending? The president has already, I think, held the gun legislation hostage. He said, well, now that I'm being investigated, I'm not moving on it. I think he was just looking for an excuse. Second of all, how's the timing going to play out? We're coming up on the 2020 election. The House has a lot of investigation to do. Nancy Pelosi seems to understand that and seems to have given instructions. We need to move quickly, and I think she's right. And the big question is, will any Republicans break rank? You're starting to see the beginning of some cracks there. If Republicans do start turning on the president and decide that they don't want to attach themselves to this, then I think you may see that is the big question that I think the future of this presidency will hang on.
Ellie Honig, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Let's talk about how this is playing outside the Beltway, outside of the coast here. And let's talk also how this is playing on Fox News. Let's listen to Geraldo Rivera just this morning.
So it's going to be the president of the United States in a conversation that was intercepted by a rotten snitch. I'd love to whap him, but that's another story. Imagine this poor president, his whole tenure in office has been marked by snitches and rats and backstabbers.
Yep.
It's amazing how he functions at all.
So this is, of course, what the president is listening to. What, though, do the president's supporters, maybe people who voted for President Trump, but, you know, they're not so sure, what are they thinking, Michael?
So in the OLC legal opinion, and, you know, you get into the weeds, Brianna, in a hurry in this case, there's a little something for everybody. There's a reference made here to this indicia of political bias on the part of the whistleblower. So to your point, the president's supporters, I'm sure when we get a look at this individual will say, aha, political bias. But then, you know, you read the next sentence and it says, nevertheless, was deemed to be credible. And so the detractors of the president will see, well, it's a credible individual. My gut check is, and I know CNN has not yet squared away the reporting as to who exactly this person was and what their job was, but commonsensically, I say, if it was someone working in the intel community given access to the White House, it's not like they plucked a talk radio host off the street. This has to be an individual who was vetted just to get their gig and seemingly will have credibility, although in the complaint acknowledges that much of this is hearsay. You know, he is relying on the reports of others. So I think there's a lot of testimony that needs to be taken before we really can look at evidence and know what it is. I know that there's a rush. People want to weigh in and know immediately which way it cuts. I just think it's premature.